Are we in the process of a global consciousness transformation? And if so, what does the state of the environment or the recent election of President Trump say from a psycho-spiritual perspective? Now, my guest today is going to talk to us about that and so much more. Best-selling author and philosopher Daniel Pinchbeck. You are here on the book tour with your most recent book, How Soon Is Now, released in February 2017. You've also authored Breaking Open the Head, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And your articles have appeared in a lot of publications, New York Times, Esquire, Rolling Stone, Wired, Art Forum. You're the co-founder of the company Evolver.net. You published the web magazine Reality Sandwich. You've been featured in documentaries, 2012, Time for Change. And you also hosted the talk show Mind Shift for Gaia TV. So you've been around a lot. I'm very familiar with your work, and welcome. Really happy to have you in studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
This new book. So the book is, tell us about what you see, as this ecological crisis. You're saying we need to look at it as a rite of passage.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my earlier work, my first book was about psychedelic shamanism, and I visited indigenous cultures in West Africa and the Amazon in Mexico, and went through different initiations using substances like ayahuasca and iboga. And as a result of that work, I began to realize that there are these rites of passage or initiation ceremonies in these traditional cultures around the planet, but our modern society doesn't have them anymore. And in a way, I feel that since we don't have them, we're almost like subconsciously pushing ourselves to bring about maybe a cathartic episode of disaster or crisis to bring about a kind of evolution of consciousness. And in a way, I think that what we're looking at with the ecological crisis, which is this kind of multidimensional phenomenon, is that crisis that we're creating. But I think it's important for us to become aware of what we're doing, and then also think about if we were to take on this initiation, this ecological crisis as a rite of passage, what kind of society would we want to create if we were to become more mature and responsible and compassionate, for the web of life on the planet.
Right. And so you're saying that we're kind of going through some archetypal turnover here where we're all sort of taking the hero's journey, I guess, if you're familiar with that. Talk a little bit about this recent election. Obviously, we're all sort of feeling this pivotal change. I mean, frankly, I voted for President Trump with the intention of saying, let's just burn the house down. Let's just see what happens, because in my opinion, voting in Hillary Clinton would have just been bringing in the same old same. So, however you feel about the candidates that we were given, a lot of people feel like, we need to evoke this change.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have personally been able to vote for Donald Trump, but I understand that people felt very frustrated and angry because here you get this one chance to be a citizen in our democracy every 4 years, and you're given a choice between two horrible candidates who both are clearly compromised and corrupt. And I guess one of the things that I argue in the book is that maybe we actually need a deeper transition in our government, our political and economic system towards something that would be more truly democratic. I mean, if you think about, in a way, the government we have now is like antiquated social technology. Like it was developed in the 18th century when information only moved at like horse and buggy speed. And now we have the internet, so everybody is, connected continuously. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was a way we could all like learn and vote together continuously if the information was clear and the debates were honest and so on, and I look at different platforms, like one that is from the Argentina called Democracy OS, another one from New Zealand called Lumio, Loomio, where they're trying to create kind of infrastructures for truly collective democratic decision-making, rather than just, voting for somebody who every 4 years who really is just compromised and represents a lot of corrupt interests. But as we've seen with Trump now, it's clear that he's very compromised by Wall Street. His, Treasury Secretary is from Goldman Sachs. Exxon is the Secretary of State now. So, we basically voted in another version of the corporatocracy, just with a different kind of angle in a way.
So now coming from your perspective and speaking about Trump, and I guess he's about to sign some executive orders, repealing some of the regulations that Obama put in as well with the EPA. A lot of people, watching our show kind of appreciate the fact that Donald Trump appears to be someone who's going to be knocking out these three legs of globalism with the open borders and global governance and the Agenda 21, which a lot of people feel Yeah, sure. Maybe some of the science with climate change they can agree with, but it's the rules and the regulations, the implementation of that. They are going to harm the middle class. They're the EPA, the UN. They're highly politicized at this point. It's not even about saving the planet. Frankly, it's very much an empire building bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean, I probably have sharp differences of opinion from a lot of people who watch this show, but I believe that we need to become mature enough, as a community, as a society, so that we can really explore subjects carefully and parse them, precisely. I mean, from the large amount of research that I did for the book, I do believe that climate change is a reality. I actually think that we are approaching a potential for ecological collapse, and it's not just because of global warming. There's species extinction. We're losing 150 to 200 species a day. We know there's a little more than 8 million species on the planet, so we're losing 10% of the Earth's biodiversity every 10 to 15 years. And we've also learned how meshed together the web of life is on the planet. The oceans are 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago, and that's because they're absorbing a lot of the excess industrial CO2, something like 60% or more of it. So we know, and that's leading to the breakdown of the coral reefs, which hold the biodiversity of the oceans together. And we know if these processes continue, like we've seen from past epochs, that it could lead to the extinction of like large mammals such as ourselves. So we actually are in a critical threshold. Now, it's true that under the neoliberal regime of Clinton and Obama, this wasn't being attended to properly. I mean, if you look at Hillary Clinton, she was supporting fracking, she was making deals with the extractive industries, and clearly, they're taking the brakes off of everything right now. That I don't think is a good idea, but it's going to require some other approach, and it may even require some levels of breakdown before people just admit that what's happening is really happening. Right.
And obviously we can argue for hours and days, weeks, months about climate change, just kind of the science behind it. We've reported on just some global warming scams, and then the science, frankly, is compromised in a lot of cases. The UN might shut you down entirely if you have a countering opinion, but no one can deny that climate change is happening. It's always happened.
It's a multidimensional ecological crisis.
Well, these extinction events have happened all throughout our history. CO2 levels were much higher in the past.
So this perspective of how soon is now is that we're in a very critical time period, and we actually need to kind of have a collective awakening and shift both our technical systems, like how we're doing farming, for instance. Industrial agriculture is very negative to the planet and depletes topsoil and so on. So we need to have different forms of agriculture, no-till, regenerative permaculture. We need to shift to renewable energy in a short time frame, not over 70 or 100 years, but maybe over 10 or 20 years, which we could do. We know that in the past, the human community has come together to do things that seem totally impossible. Like after Pearl Harbor in World War II, the U.S. shifted to wartime production. All the factories began to produce for the war. They taxed the wealthy at more than 90% and used that resource to help bring about this transition. We need that transition globally in the direction of renewable energy, regenerative farming, and non-destructive industrial practices. To do that would also require a set of changes to our economic system, to how we exchange value. These are the kind of things that I lay out in the book. And not that everybody should agree with everything that I say, but I think it's important to have a different model or different vision.
Okay, Daniel, so one of the chapters, part 4, God, Love, and Revolution, you really kind of get into love and sex, actually, and frankly, this played out in the recent election. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably an area of the book that, could be quite controversial for a lot of people. But the question is, like, if we look at what happened with the last election, there was Trump and his, grabbing of the you-know-what, and there was Hillary Clinton's husband, Bill Clinton, and his philandering, and there was Roger Ailes, one of the lead Republican strategists, the sex scandal that engulfed him. There was, what was his name, Andrew Weiner, and how he was destroyed and his wife was destroyed, and that took down Hillary Clinton. And then there was obviously this kind of hysteria around Pizzagate, which some people think is valuable and some people think is untrue. But I think if we look at all of this, we see there's some deep issues around human sexuality and also very much like alpha male kind of domination, patriarchy, in relationship to sexuality and eroticism that are subjects that our society is obviously unable to bring really up into consciousness to have a real investigation of. And I spent a long time thinking about that in the book and looking at it. And, not that I think that I have the answer, but one place that I visited that was very interesting was a community in Portugal called Tamara, which has developed a model for non-possessive relationships, transparent, non-possessive relationships. And they believe that, we can't really have peace on earth before we have peace between the genders and peace and love. So they're one group that has modeled like a new radical path. And I think it's a very important area for people to begin to think about. I mean, if you think about there's a lot of what fed into the alt-right in this last election had a kind of really sexually charged undertone, and I feel there's something that we as a species or as a society need to bring up to consciousness. What are the underlying dynamics? What are the projections and the shadows that are being played out there?
Right. Yeah, but just kind of more with these archetypal processes that are coming to the surface, that if we suppress them, it's our shadow side that gets to, so that'll come out in sexual perversions or drug abuse, things like that. Well, very interesting. We were talking a little bit about the initiation process that we would see in more ancient societies, ancient cultures, but we don't really experience that here in the West. We have really pushed aside our intuition and our intuitive selves in favor of a more left brain, logical world. And people would say the patriarchy, where we've pushed the divine feminine to the side. So we're very askew, we're very off balance. So I would love to kind of touch on that, how from a consciousness perspective, how could that be affecting our world around us?
Yeah, I'm really happy that you bring that up. I totally agree with you. I mean, one thing is because we've had such a kind of negative bias against like indigenous people and tribal societies, we've kind of just assumed that initiations don't really mean anything. But actually, there's research that suggests they not only have a cultural function, but even like a neurobiological function, that maybe that the part of our brain that makes us most distinctly human only developed in the last 100,000 years to its full capacity, which is like the prefrontal cortex. And that's how we can use language and plan for the future and process abstract symbols. But it also kind of locks us in this kind of limited self-identity, like an ego-based identity. And that's really where most people today are kind of acting out of in our society. And the fact is that if you go through these, for tribal people, you couldn't be an adult until you'd gone through this type of initiation and had visionary or transpersonal experiences. And then you would understand that, that you were connected to this cosmic whole, this larger unity, and you would be able to take responsibility for the community as a whole. So when I look at somebody like Donald Trump, for instance, and his history of just being very self-interested and sort of narcissistic, like he's like you could say like a kidult. And in that way, he's a shadow projection collectively of all of us being trapped in this immature state where we're not really doing those things that we really do need to do at this point to take care of the increasingly fragile situation on the planet that we've created sort of heedlessly.
Mm-hmm. And so what are the solutions? Because I completely disagree with the carbon tax and taxing you and I on our gas and everything. They really pushed these green initiatives, for instance, but they were so successful that now they're taxing people who that are off the grid. They're saying, well, you're not allowed to be off the grid. You need to pay into the system. Or if you have a car that goes on energy and rather than gas, then they're taxing you by the mile for how much you drive. So these solar panels, it's too effective. If truly we were at this cataclysmic event in our history, man-made, and they were really concerned about us, wouldn't they be pushing that to the side and saying, look, we need to make some real change here, and we're willing to forego our pockets?
Well, I mean, I guess I kind of question this, the they in a way, like if there's a monomaniacal or monolithic they. I think there are many different factors, and there's a huge amount of money still being made in the extractive industries. I mean, some people believe that if we take all the oil, out of the Arctic and so on, the planet will overheat. And so that actually what we should be doing is saying that like $50 trillion worth of the energy companies, the fossil fuel companies, resources are actually stranded assets that should be taken off the books because they have to stay in the ground. And we also have to remember that these companies are very skillful, and they've potentially put hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars into disinformation that shapes public opinion around climate change, the same way the cigarette companies did with tobacco for many years. As I said, from my research, I think it's quite obvious that climate change is happening, and it's certainly largely human caused, if not entirely. I mean, I know that that's, as I said, a contentious point, but we know there are more than 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now. And we know that a stable climate was 275 parts per million. And we know the last time there was this much CO2 in the atmosphere, which is a measurable kind of sheath, temperatures were 4 degrees Celsius warmer and sea levels were 100 feet higher. So that's kind of where we're heading, unless we were to say, okay, like we take responsibility for this, and we would have to curtail, kind of our use of resources. But we would have to do that through some type of social kind of collaborative process. Like, for instance, we could maybe agree that as you said, off-the-grid communities based on renewables where people are growing their own food, maybe a type of basic income or basic subsidy. I mean, one way that Trump won the election.
Well, this basically sounds like communism that has failed over and over again, though. The system of communism, which is what a lot of people are afraid of, that they're really trying to shove down people's throat, which is, sure, you guys are going to have a basic income and everyone will be equal, but it's really a system which will prop up an elite few while the rest of us will just...
But I mean, we're already in a system. I mean, how could it get any worse? We're in a system that has propped up, I mean, it's estimated that 65 people control more wealth than half the world's population. Trump appointed 17 cabinet members. Their combined wealth was more than 100 million, 1/3 of the American population. So we already have this incredible concentration of wealth, which is very unfair, because if you actually really think about it, there's no reason that somebody who, say, trades shares on a computer all day or manipulates the currencies of third world countries should make more than somebody who's, working in a truck stop or taking care of children or elderly people in a nursing home. It's just the values that we ascribe to these activities. And I think we need to really think about what values matter and how we go forward as a society, So yeah, I mean, I think that we do need to reduce wealth inequality substantially. We do need to move towards autonomous, decentralized communities that are more participatory, where people can have great information and make their own decisions, some type of basic income or way that people can support themselves. And also, as the ecological crisis deepens, we're going to need more resilience, like more self-sufficiency is going to be necessary for communities to survive. And then, but also automation is a good thing. I mean, one way that Trump won the election was by arguing that he was going to bring back the golden age of industrialization. But actually, we're seeing more and more high tech. So we're not going to see more. We're not going to see more jobs through industrialization. We're going to see more probably high tech automation. And that could be a great thing. As I argue in the book, looking even at thinkers like Oscar Wilde who talked about it, like automation could liberate people to have more time to take care of their families, to learn, to love each other, and so on. Like, we could actually scale down the amount of work people do as a social mission, right, while we're creating the basis of a more decentralized and humane society.
Right. Well, and also it's kind of like detaching ourselves from that need to compete rather than cooperate. Obviously, if everyone could work together all over the planet as the kind of a human race, I feel like we could achieve so much. They look at the space program as a perfect example.
Exactly. And that's like one of the basic ideas of the book is like, in a way, if we were to think about it from outside and look at humanity, we're like a giant planetary organism, like a superorganism that's in a symbiotic relationship with the ecology of the Earth as a whole system. And if we think about it in those terms, we begin to think about, okay, if we're like a giant body, then we should be sharing resources efficiently. It shouldn't be like, just held by these tiny pockets of power and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with you there. I did a long report on Henry Kissinger's NSSM Memorandum 200, where he specifically outlines how you have to keep third world countries kind of controlled and control the population and then extract their resources and bring it over to, the people who are controlling all of those resources. So it's definitely skewed in an unfavorable way. I just think a lot of people are also very concerned with becoming globally governed by the people who are currently in power. I mean, they've kind of...
Well, and as you said, that's why we seem to be pushing towards some type of cathartic crisis, which maybe will allow us to reconfigure, like maybe we need a deeper transition. Maybe it's not going to be Democrats and Republicans. Maybe we're going to use the internet to create a truly open source and participatory decision-making system for all of humanity to be involved with the decisions that matter.
Yeah, I know you mentioned, you've mentioned before the blockchain code, which we see with Bitcoin, something like that, which could be used to help with the voting or keep things kind of free and open. And
yeah, or other ways that we could exchange value. Like friends of mine created a platform, Time Republic with a K, which is a timeshare system. So rather than exchanging dollars, you can exchange hours, to do tasks or whatever. That's just one of many types of innovations that we could have that would allow people to, be in a more equitable relationship with each other.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being in studio with us today. The book is How Soon Is Now. The website you can go to howsoonisnow.info. I know this is available on Amazon and other places. There's an introduction by Russell Brand, a preface by Sting. A lot of people saying that this is a very important book. You need to get this now. This is going to propose a blueprint for the future. We can redesign our whole society via political, technical, social.
I hope that people will check it out, even if they don't agree with all my ideas. It's good to have another perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've had a very great perspective for years, so I highly recommend it. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Alex Jones here with a very important news update to anybody out there that wants to be prepared. But it goes beyond being prepared. Our bodies absolutely must have the good halogen iodine or we will die. And you look at all of the thyroid problems and all the people that don't have energy and that have all sorts of hormone problems. And from my research and a lot of just mainline research, it leads back to iodine over and over and over again. It's as important as vitamin C. If you don't get iodine, you die. But most people are just deficient, so they're low energy, they're sick. You got to have iodine in your body so that your body can produce the hormones you need. It is the base to so many things. And since I got into iodine 4 years ago, we've helped change the entire paradigm by developing and bringing to the public deep earth crystals from 7,000 to 12,000 feet of the purest iodine available. Other iodine comes from the ocean or from other byproducts of chemical facilities and is tainted. It's bound. It's not absorbable. I tried it. And I had incredible effects even with dirty iodine because the body needs it. When you don't have iodine, it absorbs the chlorine, the fluoride, and all these other bad halogens. Do yourself and your family a favor and check out the importance of iodine for yourself. I think you're going to be blown away. And whatever you do, support the broadcast and get a bottle of Survival Shield Nascent Iodine X2. Also consult your physician because if you've been deficient in it or have other issues, it can have some dramatic effects. As for me and most folks I talk to, it's been a game changer in the positive column, but still consult your physician because iodine is no joke. It's a key building block of the body. And if you haven't had it for a long time and suddenly have it, some folks say they've experienced things like a detoxing effect and things like that. You've got to have vitamin C. You've got to have iodine to live. You got to have water to live. Iodine is key. You must have it, but consult your physician first before you get powerful Survival Shield Nascent Iodine X2 at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll free. We can answer your questions, 888-253-3139.